Welcome. Hello, Nye and Irini. Delighted that you could come and join us. Very, very good. We are Her Art Story, and we are a series of physical and online conversations, and it's between artists and curators and arts professionals. And we're delighted that you could come and talk with us. Irini, you're a curator and cultural producer, and Nye, you call yourself a artist come software designer turned artist. So that's, and you've had quite a long-standing working relationship. So it'd be great to hear, how that came about and how you work together. And that's it for me. Just to say thank you also to the Arts Council, because they are funding these talks, supported by the National Lottery. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking back today to when we first met, and it might be just nice just to kind of go over that. I think it's 2017, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, like how many things have happened in between, and especially the past few months, of course, but which we will be talking about. But I can't even remember how we met. I'm so sorry.
It was kind of a strange. Well, we met because I was doing my very first Arts Council application. The G4A grant, and I hadn't done one before. I had just started on my project, The Seeker, and I was applying to the Arts Council to get some funding for that. And I was aware that the Arts Council like to fund you to speak to professionals as a sort of professional development thing. And obviously, that's an amazing opportunity to introduce yourself to art world people and curators who you'd like to know about your work. So I'd seen you, I'd seen the things you were doing and the stuff you're curating, and I thought, wow, it'd be so amazing to meet you. And so I Googled you, and I found an email address for you, and I emailed you.
It happens.
And nothing happened because I hadn't realized, of course, it makes sense. It wasn't an email that you use, was it? And then I went to a show, and I kind of knew you were going to be there, and I steeled myself because I felt quite uncomfortable doing it. I don't know if you remember, we were in the Watermans, and it was.
I do.
Yeah.
I remember I had seen also before we met. I knew about your work, Backdoor. And which was really interesting because obviously I was interested in ideas, similar ideas that you were exploring in the work about surveillance and self-surveillance. And I was really fascinated by this project that you were doing. And I can't remember where I saw it first, to be honest, but yeah, I remember our conversation started from that as well. And I was, and of course, like it was great to hear about the Seeker afterwards, that it was the new project that you were kind of getting into, which was a much longer journey, right?
Yeah, really a much longer journey. But it was interesting, actually, that project, Backdoor, does sort of, it's underpinned, really, even now, I'm still kind of still working with that material, and also kind of rethinking. I mean, we kind of get back. It was kind of find that when I make a piece of work, I kind of do it because I'm interested in it, but because a lot of the things I'm doing are very kind of, I'm dealing with the sort of emerging technologies, and I don't really know what they are.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what I do is I do a thing that interests me because I want to see what happens and what I get, and then I can spend like years afterwards trying to work out what it is I've done and what it is I've kind of got and what it means.
Yeah, which is quite similar, I guess, with how I've been working as well. Like just I tried always to kind of remind myself, or like just ask myself, like, why am I doing this, or like what is the purpose of that, especially at like difficult times like now or the past few months, and in terms of like, why does the world need us, like in a way, and why, and what do we do, and how do we contribute to what's happening, and how can we I don't know, how we can use our like place and position to kind of make things different in a way. So yeah, but yes, but I feel the same, like backdoor, I think it's there is a lot of it's still very relevant, and especially it's really interesting now. Actually, I would love to hear like how you see the work right now, for example, right? Because there is an increasing kind of use of surveillance, especially with the current situation, and it's something that will continue to, it's here to stay, right? So
yeah,
so it's interesting. I think it would be great to hear like how do you view your work? I mean, this is something that I'm interested in with like generally, like when I look at things that I have done in the past as well, exhibitions, etc. How do you relate to past work like now?
Yeah, it is interesting, and yeah, it's and I have thought a lot about this. I mean, with Backdoored, it's changed so much. I mean, yes, clearly surveillance is something which, or rather machinic digital surveillance is something which is here to stay. And then there's all this talk, isn't there, you know, of the increase. Clearly any time of national or international stress or pressure provides an opportunity for people with vested interest in surveilling a population to increase the degrees of surveillance, you know, all saying, aren't they, that, you know, we're getting a that the pandemic will lead to an even higher degree. And when I started doing the work, it was all, I was very interested. The kind of conversations sort of that we were thinking about at the time were about the Internet of Things, and what it meant to be surrounded by smart objects. And I know when I made the work, I was very much thinking about this sort of the way that we'd kind of internalized the idea of being watched, or we'd internalized surveillance, so that this wasn't a kind of this wasn't a government thing. It wasn't there was no sort of external agenda. We'd started to do it to ourselves. You know, we were all watching ourselves just in the same way that we're all watching each other. And that was, I guess the conversation was kind of different back in 2016. I think people are a lot less aware of sort of how exposed they were. And now the sort of conversation has kind of moved on, and these things are all very much in the sort of public domain. Though I find them less interesting artistically, because it's you know, it's a socio-political conversation that is just kind of out there. The thing that was kind of enduring for me in a way about Backdoored was it was the images themselves, these just really strange inhuman images of the world, sort of created by systems which kind of had almost acquired their own kind of agency. So the things I was always fascinated about with the images was the way they were created without any real meaningful human agency, you know, camera put in place, and then it just sits there until a search algorithm comes along, finds it, checks it, grabs a screenshot, drops it back in a server. And that was the kind of, for me, that was the thing that has sort of stayed with me, partly the very oddness of the systems, and this idea of, I've become terribly interested in the in the machine gaze, and sort of realized recently that almost everything I do is around the machine gaze. This idea that this new way of seeing the world kind of come into being.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because everything, it's almost that everything that is produced, like all these images that are produced by machines, but to be read by machines in a way. So it's really interesting. I think Trevor Paglen's work is looking a lot at these ideas as well, in terms of but it's yes, it's really interesting. I mean, one thing that I've there are a lot of things that you're talking about, obviously, there in Backdoor, that I found really fascinating, in how you moved forward with the seeker in a way. And one thing that I was really interested in was the or this categorization. So behind, like, how this entity, as you were saying, the seeker, this entity that is kind of looks at the world, but also tries to make sense of the world, like to categorize, to monitor, to quantify the world in a way, which is really interesting. But quite recently, one thing that I'm kind of drawn by, and I've been kind of looking at, is also how these processes happen, and this idea of like fantasy that we have about automation and artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, that we kind of almost see them, or like view them as autonomous entities. And so we've been moving accountability from humans, and kind of think that everything, that machines in a way are responsible for evil things, or like for biased kind of decisions, etc. When of course there is so much invisible, hidden labor behind this. And it's something that I find really interesting with the Seeker, because of course there was this massive print that we had at the V&A in the display, artificial intelligence, back in 2018, which was my last project, leaving the V&A, and it was a nice way to leave, actually, with just leaving this display there, and you had all these tags and kind of this massive map of tags that you were getting lost in. And it's really interesting. There was this human element that was behind, like hidden behind all that, that I found really, that I kind of go back to right now and think about again. So I mean, that hidden labor is very interesting. I think it's so important, it's so, and I mean, you must find this as well, so often it's like now people are, oh, AI artist, Nye, what do you think about AI? Is AI creating artwork? And there's so much kind of conversation about AI, and like you were just saying, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, it doesn't really exist. It was like a sort of pre-existing dream that we've had as humans for centuries, and it's become, and because we've already invested so many ideas of kind of agency and selfhood into the idea of AI, and then these technologies, machine learning and things have come along, and we've called it AI, and then that provides a kind of shield whereby political and kind of financial decisions can be kind of hidden. And as you say, and then it's like, oh yeah, the AI has taken your job, the AI is watching you. But that's it's a really interesting kind of point, which I think is super important to make. And it's because it's easy to talk about AI and give it all sorts of, as you say, all sorts of agency. I actually have I'm just wondering if we can share a screen, because we can actually have a quick look at the drawing. And actually you might like to see here, there we are, can you see? Yes.
Oh, we're on the wrong one. Here we are.
That's a new piece.
That's a new piece, yes. Which
oh, I want to see. I want to hear all about that.
So this is the drawing, and I mean this was wonderful, you know, because from our first meeting, you know, we worked together for quite a lot over those couple of years, and you know, it was really amazing. We did some really interesting stuff together, and this is my drawing, which is from the Seeker. So the Seeker, it's a machine entity that travels the world virtually, looks out through security camera eyes, and it describes the world that it sees. So it's a way of kind of talking about this sort of emerging machine gaze and the sort of the way machines are starting to look at the world. And this was a drawing that I made from the Seeker project, and it's basically an analysis of all of the things that the Seeker saw in the tens of thousands of places that it visited. So yes, it's this big, I mean, this is actually the smallest iteration of it. I think this is like 1.5 meters by a meter.
Yes, I think
high.
It was about that size.
Yeah. And it was the smallest, but it's been all over the world since, this drawing, in different sizes, and amazingly, this drawing has actually been acquired by the V&A, which was for their national collection, which was just lovely. But actually, you might be interested to see. I always meant to do this and sort of loop back. So the Seeker, like I say, it looked out at sort of, I think it's 30,000 different locations, and used machine learning technologies to try to make sense of the things it saw in those 30,000 locations. And I was quite interested in how a system like the Seeker, how this sort of machine's ability to look at the world was developing, because clearly it gets more sophisticated every day as the systems are trained and become cleverer. So I actually revisited the Seeker's memories at the end of last year. So you can see, in fact, here this is the this is the data that I work from.
Okay.
So when the Seeker goes out, it produces all of this, all these visions as kind of code, and then I have to search through them and aggregate them. And then what I did was I pulled them into this spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets, and you can see here the things that these labels, these are the things it saw, which correspond to the items on here. And the frequency, and then here you can see over the months how its ability to see. So it's interesting, you know, what the machine is going to get better at seeing, what it will see new things, and maybe some things it saw 2 years ago now it doesn't see. So this is actually this is completely new data from the end of November. You can see all those things in red.
That's really interesting.
Are things that it can see now,
but
it couldn't see.
You were saying of actually that it's interesting, like where the Seeker comes from as well, because it had this kind of military, because it comes from like a US kind of military background, right? Is that, because that's really interesting in terms of language as well, and words, and how it views the world, like through this kind of let's say filter of militaristic, like filter, if I can say that, maybe.
Yeah, this very, very westernized, very kind of Americanized, because I'm using an American system. It's like one of the biggest ones in the world. And although this is, I think this is a sort of commercial type of system, used by, you know, companies, governments, things like that. The origins of image recognition of machines looking at an image and trying to analyze what's in them is, you know, the real work that's being done there. The real sort of push is, it's homeland security, it's military, so it's all about threat detection, really. And one of my starting points for this project was to see whether or not that kind of looking for threat, that sort of paranoia was something which was becoming embedded in the notion of the machine gaze. You know, as something moves, as a technology moves from the military, where all the funding is, into the commercial world. And as I'm sure you remember, we found the Seeker sees a lot of threat, it sees a lot of bullets and SWAT teams and tanks and explosions in the most
really
innocuous scenes.
Yeah, I remember the photos, like the CCTV footage, like of photos of kind of lights in darkness in kind of some sort of a park or something, and just to see, or another one which was the shoes in a shoe shop, and kind of thinking of that as kind of I don't know, like a group of like soldiers or something, if I remember well. Of course, I hope I'm not making it up.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
But what is really the other thing that I found I was quite interested in, because I know you have a background as a software in software, right? And working in like this kind of technological, very male-dominated world in a way, which is really interesting. And of course, it's with you having this background, it's I guess it kind of brings a different like set of skills to the work that you're doing. But like I'm thinking kind of, you know, about like like younger artists, or like how people who find it a bit more difficult to enter this world, or like how do you even go about like working with big data sets, or like working with technological systems like that, or working with emerging technologies. So I guess I'm just kind of thinking like, how would you do you often, like, do you get kind of approached by younger artists, or like maybe even, I don't know, female artists, and in terms of like how do you make a start in working with kind of medium like that, or like with working in this world, working with technology and with digital culture? Do you think that your background like kind of, you know, helped you in that way, or it kind of gave you a bit of more of the critical perspective to enable you to do work like that? I'm just thinking like how connected is your previous life with these?
I think, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's massively connected. I mean, I originally trained as an artist. I went to art college after school, and then the internet, well, not the internet, but the web happened, and I just kind of that was just much more interesting to me at the time. And then so I spent 20 years working in software in various stages. I not necessarily coding, but interface, human computer interfaces, and also designing software. So that's been massively useful to me, or at least once I kind of, when I went back to art college in back in 2011, and I was like, I don't want anything to do with software at all. I'm just going to do drawings, and I did like really big, laborious drawings, but a bit like this, but with more muscle pain. But then somehow or another, the software and the hardware just crept back in, and I thought, actually, no, rather than rejecting that path, I can use it to bring something new. And one of the things I've found really interesting is that
exactly, and in a very very interesting way.
Thank you. But yeah, that ability to straddle, or not to, but to kind of move things from one, because a conversation can be really prevalent, really kind of baseline in one domain, but almost unheard of in another domain. So, you know, for example, backdoored, you know, when in the software world, Internet of Things governance, you know, was a hot topic, but wasn't really something that people were thinking or talking about outside the kind of engineering world in any very significant way. And that was kind of why I was, you know, when I came up with Backdoored, I was so excited because it was a way to take the one thing to another. But yeah, so for me, having that background has made it, that's what's made it possible in many ways to work like this. But I wouldn't want to suggest that you need to spend 20 years working for a software company to be able to do this, because that would be a bit drastic. But
not at all.
Exactly, that would be awful, wouldn't it? But the real kind of takeaway, I mean, I collaborate loads, and you know, when I make these projects, when I design these software systems that go out into the world to do things for me, I then, you know, I work with highly skilled software engineers to actually make the things happen. I think collaboration is just really important. You know, particularly when you're like us, when you're in that sort of art and science space, I think it would be very difficult to have the, you know, to be able to do all the stuff yourself. You know, you could spend so much time learning to keep up with software. So it's hard. I think there's a real power in collaborating.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
So,
I think I don't actually, with all the years that I've been working with in this field, like with digital culture, with you know, between like art and technology, I don't think that I've worked with an artist who has been kind of producing or like creating work on their own. So it has almost always been in collaboration with many other people. Which of course is really interesting as well. And for me, it goes back to this a little bit to this to how I was kind of reading and kind of first like studying about artists in, like, you know, hundreds of years ago, in terms of like having their these polymath and studio, like polymaths and like studios of experimenting with so many different things. Maybe, I don't know if you want, do you want to show anything else from like a recent work, or do you want to, because otherwise we can take down the screen. But I would love to see your work. I would love to see your work. I know I keep asking you things to distract you from.
What can I've got a couple of things that you possibly haven't seen, I think.
The other thing that I wanted, maybe while you're thinking of like work to share, like the other thing that I just wanted to say that I'm so glad that the V&A acquired the CKR, the drawing piece. That is brilliant, because one thing that I have, and I'm sure it's the same with you, like one thing that I found challenging all these years, like working with museums, but also like art institutions and exhibiting work, like which has like a very big like technological element, is of course the in terms of collecting work as well and commissioning work. It's really challenging, like you work with many people who there is this kind of fear that the work is not going to stay for a long time as well. So it's quite, there are a lot of challenges as well in terms of maintaining the work, or like preservation as well. So I just wanted to kind of I wonder like how you've learned to work around that, because it's something that many artists find really difficult, like even now, like working with artists and with younger artists and co-commissioning or commissioning work, or like helping people produce work. There are so many things that you need to, because you know, sometimes we start with prototypes which then change over time. And I know with the CKR, when we were kind of working together around the artificial intelligence display, we were kind of thinking like ways to present, because it was a new piece for you then, right? So it's really interesting, and So, and I really liked how it was presented. I really love this drawing as well. So I'm really glad that it ended up in the collection.
It was a lovely moment when that happened. My parents were so proud. But yeah, it was great, and it was really it was lovely to be able to exhibit in that show, and then actually the knowledge that, you know, the huge drawing is somewhere in the archives and people can go and visit it. It's really lovely, as you say, and it is an interesting thing. I imagine that curation and preservation in a digital art world must be just so difficult potentially. I mean, what I tend to end up with is a software system, like a software stack, and then some kind of tangible assets, which are maybe not in themselves really complex technologically. You know, maybe they're videos or they're drawings, but the software stack itself potentially needs to be maintained. And in a way, that's I haven't quite worked out what. So I mean, the Seeker is a software stack. You know, it's a load of programs, modules that operate together, and the Seeker bots that operate together, and they live in the cloud. But how that could exist or have an existence. I mean, it is a piece of art. It's an artwork.
Yeah.
But how that is actually manifested.
Exactly.
That is
and it's really interesting because really, also, it's interesting because then you have in the collection of a museum one aspect of this work. It's not, because of course, as you say, I think of the Seeker also more than the drawing. Like there's so many, it's the software, it's a whole other world behind it, right? So it's something that is quite challenging in terms of collecting, I guess, and of course preservation, like in the longer term, like how these work, what it will be like in like 100 years time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and even for, you know, as an artist, it's like, well, okay, in a way, you know, the drawing that you saw is, when people talk about the Seeker, they think of that drawing, but actually that's just one output of the project. The project itself is something which is more performative and exists as a software. It's not even just a software entity, it's a network of the software, and then the kind of the cameras all over the world, and the my labor, and it's a whole thing, a whole ecosystem, as it were.
Which is really interesting. I think it's something that I've been thinking quite a lot lately, because of course now with the pandemic, everything has been put on hold, and how do you, and I found myself in a position where I've been planning for an exhibition that will happen next year, and of course it might have we might still have the same restrictions in place. So it's kind of thinking about like, how do we even, you know, all these like that, thinking about how we usually perceive exhibitions, and where we have a final outcome, an object, right? Like the drawing in the Seeker as an example, but then how do we share like everything else? How do we move beyond that object kind of representation, and how we can share meaningfully with audiences and with people in general, like the or the research or the other aspects that are behind kind of when artists develop ideas like that. So it's something that, for example, I've been thinking in terms of like, I don't know, could we use online platforms and spaces to maybe create other dimensions for exhibitions, and like, just share, not in a way just to have move to translate exhibitions online, but more than that, like thinking of like, how do we, I mean, I don't know, how has the current situation, how has it affected your ways of working and producing and like, creating work in a way?
it's an interesting, because actually thinking of what you were saying about this online, having some kind of meaningful online sharing of work and research is it's a really interesting question. But when I was when we were talking about preparing for this, and we were saying, okay, let's make it like a virtual studio visit, and I was thinking, oh yeah, it would be as if, you know, Irini was coming into my studio, you know, and we pretend that we're doing that. And then it just occurred to me just before I thought, well, actually, hold a sec, you are in my studio, because almost everything that I have or do now actually exists in the cloud. So, you know, the spreadsheet that I just showed you, that's part of my studio, and it's as real, you looking at it over Zoom, as it would be if you were sitting right next to me. So actually all of my assets and working and research actually already exist in that space. How you would you know, what you would do with that, I don't know, but it was just a bit of a sort of paradigm shift, because I was just thinking, oh yeah, it's a pity we can't have a real studio business. Yeah, I don't know about how it's affected. It's been such a strange time. It's been really hard to distill yet what it means. You know, at first when lockdown happened, and I felt so utterly rootless, and kind of lost. And for a while, you know, I've been just on the verge of a couple of really shows that were really important to me, sort of personally and professionally, and then they didn't, and it was strange. But then apart from the fact now that I have to work in my bedroom, surrounded by cats and family, actually it started to be okay. And I imagine that some shifts will have happened in the way I kind of think about producing things, but I think it's too early to be able to pick them apart yet. What about you? How has it affected you?
Yeah, it's quite in a quite similar but also different way, because of course, I mean, with Future Everything we don't have a venue, so also moving to Future Everything from the V&A and Waterman's, where I was responsible for doing things in a space. Like at Waterman's, for example, I had to curate exhibitions like a number of exhibitions for the year, but at the V&A we had very physical, events with big audiences. I had to kind of shift suddenly to an organization that had no venue, which was a really interesting way of working. We kind of, I feel that we've been operating more as like me being like, I don't know, with a team of people as a curator, like just just going around the world, and it's been really interesting because we have been working with many arts organizations, collaborating with other sectors as well, but it's very similar. Like we had to postpone and put on hold loads of projects and events. Some things we can do online, but not everything. And I don't want to think like from a curatorial perspective that I don't want to translate everything online. It doesn't make sense. But also it's been interesting because it meant that it gave us, after going through the origin, like the initial, as you had, like this few, some time of kind of being lost and having to kind of deal with this sudden situation, and thinking of different ways of working, and also managing everything and making sure that we were all communicating, since we were not able to be in the same office. I think some good things have come out of that, in terms of we have started doing things slower, thinking about research as well, like thinking about reflection in terms of how we do things. There were things that we were considering even before the whole situation, because we knew that we had to become more sustainable. We couldn't fly people from all over the world, for example, to run talks and festivals, etc. So we had to kind of think about different ways of working. And we also launched a new project, a program called Future Focus, which is kind of, it's online conversations and gatherings, thinking about crisis, not just the current crisis, but thinking about ongoing crisis that we have been facing, and how artists, how the arts, how art communities and creative ways of doing things and thinking differently can help us reflect and navigate and reconcile, basically. So we've been talking a lot about other things that are happening, right? Like racial injustice and all these kind of inequalities in the world right now. So yeah, and it's something that we're very keen to continue doing. So here, from this perspective, it's been interesting as a process to kind of just step back a little bit and think and reflect.
Yeah. I think that reflection time has actually that's been the big plus for me too. You kind of don't, normally you're just so driven, from one deadline to the next, all of the things that you have to deliver, and actually to have time to sit and think about things. I think that's been quite interesting. I'll show you, as it sort of fits. I was in the kind of interesting position of, I had a really wonderful, exciting commission from the Lowry in Salford for a festival, which was supposed to happen in April, and of course was cancelled. And my commission wasn't finished when everything kind of went down. So I was then I had to reimagine the work for a different kind of presentation and in a different way. And that was one of the sort of key things that I've been doing over lockdown. But I can show you just quickly. So this is this piece here. This is my new video piece, and it's called Slash Artifact. And basically what I've done is I have annexed, in a sort of big power exercise, I have annexed a large area of Mars and built a super tall wall around my territory. And in the piece of work, and everybody else is on the outside in the piece of work, it's a journey across the Martian landscape, circling around the outside of my territory.
That's brilliant.
So it's I thought it was really it sort of plays on a lot of things that I've been very interested in recently. I did a piece last year, and I think you probably wouldn't have come across it, called Insulae, which was actually it was a commission from Sky Arts 50 in Barbican and Lumen Art Projects, and it was a sort of responding to ideas of Britishness, and it was took place in the Barbican, and it was a video piece, and it's a journey created in Google Earth, so it's using satellite mapping data, and it's just a journey across the sea, just right around the British coast, just sort of circling around but never actually landing. So you're just circling endlessly around the sea just off the coast. And I became terribly interested in this sort of mapping software, and the way that these sort of satellite mapping systems, they kind of allow all sorts of new things, and for us to see new things, but at the same time they kind of they sort of colonize and take control of what is to be seen.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I just think that's a really interesting it's just a really interesting duality. And again, what I hadn't realized when I started doing the project, but of course, Google Earth, it was a military project. It was CIA, and then the guy who designed it and moved to Google. So it's basically, so I got very interested in the whole notion of this sort of satellite view of the world, and how satellite data and satellite visualizations, this sort of top-down view, has become such an important part of our cultural aesthetic, and it permits so many things. But of course, the real underlying purpose is that anywhere that you can accurately see, you can drop a bomb on. So it's all about military control in a way. But that's a sort of I'm digressing slightly, but I was very I've always wanted to, when I was a little girl, before I decided I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to be an astronaut. That was always my dream. And I'm a real sci-fi geek, and just the idea of moving across, because, you know, there's so much amazing satellite imagery of Mars now, and it's really strange, because it's like we have a sort of visual relationship with the planet, but it's like a vertical one. So it's a machine we're seeing as if we were machines.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than that sort of direct surface thing. So became very interested in that. So I also wanted, I was very interested in trying out the kind of persona of being, of making the kind of move where you would actually annex part of Mars and build a wall around it. I was just really interested in, in making that kind of gesture. I thought it'd be an interesting
thing. I think this is really interesting. Yeah, it brings up like so many interesting ideas and issues as well. And
Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, I don't know if the video is going to work on the thingy, but it's
yeah, I can see it is working.
Yeah.
But yes, I think I also like think in quite similar terms, in terms of how we are creating constantly like new forms of control and colonization with like through technologies. And of course there is it's quite interesting that is like it's such a small group of companies that can, you know, start like run all of these. So and of course there's still, and like even I'm going to go back to my kind of current work and obsession with like thinking about labor, but there's this divide in terms of like global north and global south, and how there are new forms of colonizing people through these forms of like technologies and like labor, etc. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's such an interesting.
So how were you going to show this work? Was it going to be in a gallery space, in a physical space?
It was going to be in a physical space, and I designed these amazing video like towers, like video wall towers.
Okay, yeah.
They were going to be just these amazing walls, these big screens. So they were kind of monumental in themselves. You had the monumentality of the wall, and then you would move around them, but you'd be forced to keep reevaluating your perspective. So that was the original design. But of course, you know, moving forwards, I can't do that. So actually, I've remade the piece as a single channel video work with this really with surround sound, which is really but it's become much more intimate, I think, and perhaps more sort of emotional. It's become quite a different piece, and maybe that's a sort of characteristic of the sort of long reflection that I've been doing, or maybe it's something to do with the fact that I'm just with the kind of isolation. I don't know. I think probably it will become clear why it changed so much afterwards.
But yes, definitely. Yeah, and definitely, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, definitely you relate different to the work in the current situation anyway, right? And it does feel like as a different experience from what you had in mind originally.
But it's still, I think it still needs, it's a piece that I want to show. So it's going to be shown in the Beaux Arts Visions Festival later this year.
Oh, great.
But it's going to be, it kind of has to, it's a projection piece, but it has to be in a real space. It's going to be full wall size with a sort of surround sound, because I want it to be quite immersive.
Yeah.
It's very, something you can't do. I can show you the video on the screen, but it's not the same.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's a new piece I've just finished, so it hasn't been sort of fully published. So it's a little preview.
Great, that's brilliant.
Hopefully maybe you get a chance to see it. That would be lovely. I wanted to show you, and this is totally work in progress, but it's not even in progress, it's in pre-progress. I've been doing...
That's a very sneak preview then.
Yeah, it's a super sneak preview. And it's just research. But I've been doing this research commission for UCL. So a sort of collaboration with academics. I've been doing some work with the Millard Space Science Laboratory, which is really exciting.
That's great, yeah.
And I've become really, really interested in satellites as things. I realized after I made Insuli that I was I'd almost internalized the satellite. It was like I'd become a satellite, and I'd forgotten that machine was actually in between me and the vision and the sea image that I had. And I became terribly interested in what it means for the satellites looking down on us. The fact that, well, in what that sort of vertical view means psychologically, how it kind of transforms geography into aesthetics and sort of own spaces, but also in terms of there's a whole kind of power struggle. This is the new technological and military frontier, the satellite sphere, the sort of low Earth orbit, mid-Earth orbit. This is where the big militarized nations are jostling for power and control. And we kind of, and these machines, they have so much increasing amounts of information about us and ability to watch us. And we have no relationship back with them in a way. We don't see them, we don't think about them. It's happening so far outside of our perception that it's almost not, it's not even that much talked about. So I became terribly interested in that, and as a sort of early stage thing, I did this, which you might like. So this is a speeded up version of the satellite in low Earth orbit over my house at any one time. Wow,
that's brilliant.
Look, so much. So over my house, something like 75 a day pass over at any one time. Same for you. There'll be 8 or 9 in your sky. That
is incredible, yeah.
Isn't it? It's so interesting, isn't it? All that's just happening right now and we don't see it. So that's it.
It's a really interesting way also to think about monitoring and surveillance, like going from what is in our immediate environment in terms of like from our mobile phones to kind of different devices that we have, or just working out around your city, your town, like all the cameras, etc. But also, as you say, there is this kind of limit. We don't think what is beyond that. And of course, like humans have been kind of cluttering and colonizing space for so long, and there is such a huge amount of like things that surround our planet as well, and of course like satellites is such a fascinating thing to kind of think about in terms of like control and surveillance as well. It's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm really super
I love this piece. I would love to I have to see it properly when it's when you've done more work on it, but yeah, it sounds amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested in how this is going to work out. It's going to be really it's just such a it's very meaty subject. It's just, and that's kind of, we'll talk about it more another time. I'm afraid I might get sort of slightly off topic.
Yeah, and I'm aware of time as well, and like
You're right, time has just flown, hasn't it?
I know, yeah. But yeah, it's been so nice talking to you and spending time together after so long.
It really has, hasn't it? Yeah.
And it does feel it is a studio visit, right?
It totally is a studio visit. It really is. Yeah. It's so nice. It's lovely to.
Thank you for having me in your studio.
Well, I didn't even tell you about these, did I? My pictures in the background.
No, I was wondering actually about that. Yeah.
This is actually. Sorry, Laura. Do we need to start?
No, it's fine. Go for it. My privileged access here.
So what this is, when I was saying that I was still working with the backdoored images, this is maybe the seeker. These are sort of seeker images, and this is related to this the project that I'm working on at the moment with Uber Morgan. So the one we talked to you about a while. So
yes, yeah. You mentioned that some time ago. Yeah.
So we're still developing it. So it's an experimental horror film for and by machine networks. And this is some of this. This is actually some of the imagery that I've been working on. So what you can actually see, it's a machine. It's from machine in machinic context. It's a bird. But you know that trope that you have in thrillers where they kind of come up with some blurry picture of some terrorist or whatever, and they say, "Oh, can you just take that down to the lab and sharpen it up?" And then they kind of run it through some Photoshop filters, and suddenly it's a high-res image. And you're just like, yeah, that doesn't happen. But actually, it sort of does now. So you can get AI or machine learning systems which will do that. They'll take a small image, and then what they try to do is they try to guess what's in the image. So they will sort of guess and invent new data. So when they resize it, they will put all this new stuff in, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's what this is. This is part of an image which has been sort of massively increased by trying to get one of these machine learning systems to guess what it is and how they should make it bigger. So
wow, that's that's very interesting.
They make some the images are produced that way are fascinating, because it is that sort of weird process of guesswork.
I also had I was able to have like a proper a background. I have my boring living room instead, but never mind.
I did experiment a lot with background. Actually, this is quite a nice one.
For me, it's the limitation of technology, because of course my Mac is too old to support a Zoom background.
Yeah, but yes, these are all.
That's cool.
They're just, yeah, really. And here's actually, I was going to pretend this is my studio. I like this. Yeah.
That would have been a very obscure kind of
It really would, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Many things I'm personally interested in. So that was great. Super interesting.
Oh, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think our audience will really enjoy it as well. You know, that sort of immersion into sort of, you know, the technology and how it affects our lives. And I think next up we've got some, you know, sort of very painterly painters. So that's a really nice kind of contrast. So
great.
Thank you very much.